Before we start the episode, we would like to take a moment of silence in remembrance of the lives of Jalen Ferguson and Tony Saragusa, both beloved members of the flock who passed away much too soon. Well, welcome back to One Winning Pod. It's been a very eventful and, in a sad way, couple of days, weeks, whatever it's been since the last time we recorded. I remember waking up to the news of the passing of Jalen and then seeing the news of Goose and just all the bad news of the day. Really, hit you hard. These young men, younger than us for Jalen, and the Goose, younger than maybe a lot of people's parents who maybe listen to the show or even themselves, right? Like, it's just so sad to see this happen. And crazy in particular with Goose, like, he seemed so full of life and just like his normal self less than a month ago at the celebration that me and Chris went to of the 20-year anniversary of the Super Bowl win, and just truly, truly shocking.
Yeah, it was a bizarre day. There's really no other way to describe it. I didn't really know what to think when we saw the news about Jalen Ferguson, and then with Goose later, so many have said so much that I already don't know if I have anything else to add, but it just goes to show how this fan base and fandom in general, it's more than just about football. We don't actually know these guys, but we see them play, we hear their stories, they have an impact on the community that they're adopted into. Goose definitely had a big impact on the Baltimore community. Jalen, I'm not as familiar if he did anything or not, but whether or not he did, he was primed. It looked like, he was at least getting ready for a big season, might have finally had his place on this team. But, in on both those things, it's just, take every day that you got as a blessing. It's just a sad reminder of that. And, we send prayers, well wishes, thoughts, whatever anyone sends in that situation to their families, and just, it's all you can do.
Yeah, with Jalen, I think it's just such a shame, man. I mean, it just reminds you of, Trey Walker, and that similar thing with the Ravens. I mean, I think he was only around the team for a year, and the impact that he had, on the team for that 1 year, I think was huge. Definitely all sympathies to the family of both those guys. It's just really sad. I mean, you said it well, Peter. Football is more than family here. It's a big deal. So, we wish the families the best.
Both of those players played on the defensive side of the ball, which is the topic of today's show. We wanted to kind of talk about how the Ravens were able to create a culture of dominance in defense and continue it through various generations and eras, and kind of how they did it, what pieces of the puzzle are needed, and like kind of how we got here.
Yeah, definitely. We look at the 2022 season that's coming up. The Ravens are going to have a new defensive coordinator, a guy who's obviously been with the franchise in the past for a bit, spent one season in Michigan and then came right back here. And, there's a lot of optimism, I think, among the fan base, from the way I see it at least, that, this is going to be a good move for the Ravens, and that they're going to continue to pick up right where they've been with pretty much every defensive coordinator has been a success for this team. And you look back at it, the culture of defensive dominance that this team has had since 1998, over 2 decades, where they've really been a top echelon defense. Sure, there's been down years here and there. More often than not, that's been due to injury. So I think what we're going to do this episode is just kind of look at how has this team been able to play at this high level on this side of the ball for so long, and just take a deep dive into it, because we've kind of just expected great defense with this team because of all the seasons that they've had doing it. But, when you step back and look at it, it's a good amount of success over a almost a quarter century. That's pretty impressive at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, and it's like it's almost overstated a little bit, but I put a lot of stock in just like the like, you know, founding culture, right, of you know, in 98, from 98 to 2000, or, you know, 2001, you know, I think the Ravens really kind of struck gold. You had so many good defensive players that were, you know, drafted by the Ravens, brought in by the Ravens as free agents. You know, you just really had a team that kind of, you had the right people in place, and you had, you know, you kind of like fostered the right mindset, right? And I think Ray and, you know, a lot of the guys, I think, talked about it actually at the 2000 celebration too, where, you know, there was, I think it was Ray who said something about how, you know, they knew they kind of had the right players in house, but they didn't really like unlock the mindset that like, oh, like if we, you know, do some things a little bit differently, like we could be like a defense to remember, right? But I think as a whole, like I really think that if you have, you know, that sort of group of people, you know, especially at the start of something new, some new organization, I think that really does help set the culture of excellence beyond. I mean, think about it, like, you know, at least in, you know, my work, you know, I'm work at a startup, and one of the big things for startup is culture, right? Especially, you know, if we're talking like, you know, I'm in like a tech startup culture, and one of the things that's like always talked about is the founding team of like having good people in place, because, you know, when you go from, you know, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, those founding members are really kind of like the people who establish the culture of, you know, how are you going to do certain things? Like, what are your values? You know, how, you know, what sort of things, you know, do you like to spend, you know, more time on versus other things? And, you know, that influences who else you bring on, and how they sort of, you know, include themselves in the fold. Right. And I think that is, you know, applied across everything. But I do really think, you know, in terms of like the Ravens culture of like, that was a big deal. You know, the Ravens being a new franchise at that point, didn't really have any identity. That group of people from 98 to 2001, that really defined the identity from all the years to come.
I like that analogy that you put in there with, you know, the startup analogy, because, I mean, even though the Ravens weren't an expansion team, they did still have to relocate. And, you know, you're at that point, you're in a new city, you have to connect with a new fan base. Sure, the personnel is pretty similar coming over, but, you know, the Ravens did make a coaching change. Infamously, Bill Belichick was not brought in as the head coach. They went with Ted Marchibroda to start with, and then after he didn't work there was Brian Billick. But, you know, I never really thought about it in that lens, but you do bring up an excellent point in that sense. Sure, it took them 2 seasons, but that's really nothing in the scale of the NFL. Say, you know, 98 through 2001 really was the Ravens finding what their identity was as the Baltimore Ravens. And yeah, it really does go back to Ray Lewis at the core, and, you know, not just him, but just the guys who bought into that philosophy, that you know, hard-nosed, intimidating defense that didn't care how few points the offense scored. They were always going to make sure that the other team would score even less, as much as possible. And yeah, that's an excellent parallel to it that I hadn't really thought about, but I totally agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, it was all about these players right at the beginning. These players kind of set the tone. You got Ray Lewis, Boulware, McAllister, Starks. They were all there for that opening run. And then you also had the mercenaries. You know, you had McCrary, Rod Woodson, Tony Siragusa. Like, they created the culture, and it kind of just persisted. There was always somebody from that group that was around, you know, and then the next group, and so on and so forth. There was always some sort of continuity. And I think the other thing to point out is the continuity in ownership and overall leadership. When Bisciotti bought the team, famously, he didn't fire anybody during the transition. He really loved all the people that Art Modell had in place. And I think that's another kind of point, is even all the way at the top organizationally, just a belief in what they were doing and trying to maintain continuity. I mean, we have so many people in that building, Dick Cass, for instance, who just retired, that have been there since the start, and they haven't left, and it's wild how uncommon that is, not only in industry, but in sports. So that's just a really important piece as well.
Yeah, I think you're referencing that interview that Steve just did with Marlon, right, on Studio 44.
Yep.
That was a really good interview. If listeners haven't checked that out, highly recommend. We don't get to hear much from Steve Bisciotti, but really well done interview. And for as eclectic as a guy Marlon is, he's done a great job on that show. And another thing that Bisciotti said in that interview, he was talking about what his relationship is with the team, and explained how, in his domain in the business world, when he was starting Aerotech, I believe it was, he was always taking the reins in that because that was his domain. He knew all the ins and outs. But when he took over the Ravens, he stayed in his lane, for lack of a better term. He understood that despite the fact that he had all that knowledge, all that pedigree in his field, he understood that the people that he was now employing were so far ahead of where he was as far as football knowledge was concerned in that domain, that it was basically pointless for him to try and catch up and try and override those people, which makes logical sense if you think about it. But as we know, that's not always how people in that position would think. And I think you got to give him a lot of credit for that, for him to see, okay, what's working. Let me not mess with that, and let me figure out how I continue to foster that. And we certainly know that there are sports owners who get in the way of the football people, and not to mention, maybe it might be a certain team that might also play in Maryland that's had 3 different names over the past 5 years, but. But
he was wanted for a subpoena at this point.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. No. Or no. But realistically though, but you could also have the owner. Like Shaz Khan, I think is a good example of he's not necessarily as hands on, but there is an element, I think, of hiring the right people to be able to trust. Right. Urban Meyer was not that guy. And I'm not. This isn't like I called it like kind of situation, but it was more of just like, yeah, in hindsight, that was not the right hire to put your trust in and then say like it's your job. Absolutely not the right call. So there is an element of knowing when to step in, but also like I guess knowing what you have and bringing in people who you think are going to add, value to your organization, and then, then building the culture around them to supporting them, right, and giving them the continuity. I mean, that's why people around the league, refer to the Ravens, Steelers, Patriots, a lot of these teams that, you've had coaches for over 10 years. That's because they have organizations that are so, well built up, and they have a culture of what they want to do, and it's, sure, maybe Ravens haven't won a Super Bowl, every single year. They've only won 2 in the last 20. It's a good number, but it's not the Patriots. I'm sure we could have had more, but on the grand scheme of things, like, that's really all you want. You want to have success, and you want to bring your fan base in. You want them to get excited about what you're doing. And like you talked about at the top too, there's also there's something to be said about having a team and a community that supports the team, and no matter what, they buy into the players, they buy into the culture, they buy into the stories. Like, that's something special. Not a lot of teams do that.
I do think it's kind of impressive too when you look at the years, right? So obviously you had Ray Lewis from the very beginning in 1996 all the way through the 2012 season. The team then continues from there on out to actually have pretty darn good defense. Like, it didn't really fall off. And some years were a little bit better after that in a league that became more and more, high scoring and pass happy. And like, how did they do that? Well, I think it was the constant turnover as well of talent, reinvestment in high profile players. So you had Nada come in halfway through that experience. You had Terrell Suggs carrying on the mantle, Jimmy Smith, Webb. I think all those players were really key kind of baton passers to the next generation. And I mean, these are not luck picks. These were high draft picks. Like, we're going ahead and we're taking a guy that is, at the very top of the draft, one of the best players that we can get. We're not up there often. Suggs was one of those players, high draft pick. We're not up there often. Nada was a high one. I mean, they constantly, when they had the opportunity to, at a high draft pick, almost always go defense. And they continued this year, which I think is important to talk about with Hamilton.
Yeah, definitely. The hit rate that they had on defensive players in the first 14 seasons, I want to say, that their franchise is just incredible. Over that time, to get Ray Lewis, Peter Boulware, Chris McAllister, Dwayne Starks, Ed Reed, Haloti Ngata, Terrell Suggs, that's incredible. That's so many good players. That's an understatement. Those are all pro caliber players that they were able to draft, and they hit on all those guys. And at that point, it's not luck. It's scouting. It's, the coaches really know what they want, who's going to fit the culture, who's going to buy in. And, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but you did bring up Hamilton. I think it is interesting, you look at that, because around 2010 or so, they did drop off a bit in that, they drafted guys like Courtney Upshaw, Matt Elam. Who in the world was that guy from Kansas State who was supposed to...
Arthur Brown.
It was Arthur Brown.
Arthur Brown. I couldn't even remember the guy's name.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Sergio Kindle is kind of in there, although he was a slightly different situation.
Right.
There was definitely a doldrums of the draft for us.
Yeah.
Undeniable.
But they were able to rebound. I mean, after around 2016, or 2017, Marlon Humphrey, Adafe Owe, Matt Judon, they came back, and... from 2010 to 2016, you could kind of make the argument, okay, maybe the defense wasn't quite the Ravens' defense. They were still pretty good, but they were never quite at that level that they were. But then once 2018 came, that defense was back to, I don't know if I'd quite say they were all the way up to dominance of like a 2000 or 2006, but 2018 and 2019, excellent defensive years for the Ravens. 2020 had some bad spots early on, but they really turned it up at the end of the season. So you see them get back there, especially after Ray, Ed, and Terrell have all left. Huge, very promising for the future that this team can continue that defensive tradition even after all those guys that we were talking about have moved on.
There was an interesting point too with the draft where I felt like the baton was a hot potato. Like, there wasn't really that continuity player. I would say maybe you could say it was Mosley, but like, there was definitely a period of time where they were a little bit in the wilderness as far as having a star player, kind of in the prime of their career. I think they had some, maybe like, Suggs was still there, but he wasn't like truly in his prime anymore. Things like that. But they did bring in guys like Eric Weddle at that time. So, maybe that's kind of how they balanced it out. They had a little bit more like him, Tony Jefferson. Maybe those were the players that helped kind of bringing outside experience and tradition, but also knowing what the Ravens have been all about. It's just interesting. I think the team has gone through so many different iterations, and I'm glad you brought up Owe as well, because I think that was another, even though he wasn't a high pick, I mean, it was a first round pick, but it was 31. We've seen how much he's electrified our pass rush and how he can be that next huge impact player.
It's funny that you guys kind of brought it up. I mean, obviously, the organization isn't infallible. There are always going to be some missteps of, not drafting the right player, bringing somebody in, that maybe wasn't a great fit. Earl Thomas, being a great example of worked out fine in 2019, 2020, he was gone. But that being said, I think the one thing I was kind of just realizing as we were talking about this is that, I know, around the league when the Cardinals decided to kind give up on Rosen after a year and then go ahead and draft Kyler Murray at 1 the following year. I think a lot of people probably praise that trade and say, like, if you have the 1 overall, like, go get the best quarterback available. Like, no, doesn't matter what you did last year. Like, it's a no-brainer kind of situation. I kind of want to say the Ravens have been, at least especially on defense, it's like they've also sort of had that mindset. So I mean, I think Arthur Brown was a great example of, drafted 2014, who the Ravens pick up in the first round, CJ Mosley. And while Brown did stick around for a while, I'd like to think that the Ravens kind of, entered that situation of, in 2013, you have your 2 cornerstone players of Ray Lewis and Ed Reed leave at the same time. I can see how that would be a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction of, we have suddenly have a need at 2 positions that we have not had a need for in a very long time. And, the Ravens tried, Ozzie tried to fill those gaps with those guys, mixed results. But I think the key of a good organization too is realizing, all right, we want to have an organization that supports the players and coaches and, gives them free reign to kind of do what they want to do, but also be realistic about the situation of maybe they saw at that time, what, maybe, we didn't see year 1 what we thought we might see. Maybe we should, have a little bit more of a contingency plan, or maybe we should, hey, look, we're gonna have the same need this year. We, don't have needs in other areas. Let's go spend another pick. Let's do the double dip, right? That's what we're praising DaCosta for, of doing the double dip in these drafts. Right? Let's go back and let's take a CJ Mosley. Let's bring in some free agents that kind of help, help fill these needs, while also, it didn't end up working out with those players, but, in other situations, it can be helpful to bring in a free agent to kind of, hold down a position while they're, helping out one of these other young guys to kind of develop, right? Sometimes it just takes them a little bit longer. Tyus Bowser being a great example of it took him a while to be able to finally become a starter, but now, he's a pretty good quality player. So, I think that's also part of it too, of being an organization that realizes just we need to make sure that we have the, we're not just cutting people after a year because they're not, up to this high bar. No, we can still develop them, but bring in guys to, also kind of help them along and not put the team in a bad spot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how they drafted Matt Elam and Arthur Brown immediately after the retirement. Definitely, like you said, addressing those players and probably 2 of the worst draft picks of that era, just maybe kind of going for need. I do want to point out, I called it the Ray Lewis effect. So when you have this iconic player who's now cast into a statue, right? They clearly wanted to maintain this middle linebacker excellence. So they went with Brown. He didn't do anything. They drafted Mosley, and he was pretty good. And now they drafted Queen, right? They kind of went back to the well. They lost Mosley, and they immediately were like, we got to go get ourselves a middle linebacker. And I feel like that's one of the bad, quote-unquote, side effects of the whole experience with Ray is now there's always this desire to maintain the middle linebacker excellence, which has resulted in some of their worst picks. You know what I mean? And obviously we hope Queen can turn it around and really become a really consistent star player. But I think it's just kind of interesting how he left such a big hole just in all aspects of the identity of the team. And the Ravens have been kind of focused on it, even though they probably are don't want to think that way. But I think deep down there's still a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think it's just inevitable. Like you're saying, you had a player of that caliber who was the foundation of essentially the way your franchise plays football. The defensive style that they had, the swagger, the intimidation, just the will to go out there and stop the offense as much as needed, so that it doesn't matter what your own offense does. And I mean, yeah, I think that you're right on the ball there with, I think it's impossible for that to not be subconscious within that organization. As we said, it's mostly the same people, and the people that are different have been handpicked by the people who are still there. So that's got to be in the collective subconscious of who's there, even if, as we've said before, the league has kind of moved on from that type of player. And I think, to give the Ravens some credit, they have realized that to an extent. Mosley, there were some linebackers, maybe like a Patrick Willis, who were more of a throwback in the time when Mosley was on the team. I think Mosley was a little more athletic than a guy like that. And I mean, Queen has the physical skills to be a linebacker that can thrive in today's NFL. He just needs a little more coaching and I think a little more seasoning, and we'll just see if there's enough time for him to blossom into the player that his athleticism gives him the potential to be. I agree with what you're saying, but I do think we need to give the Ravens a little bit of credit here that they are searching for the linebacker of 2022, or the linebacker that will fit the modern NFL. But maybe they've forced it a little bit when they should have waited for the correct player.
Yeah. I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind too, and we've been talking a lot about players, but I mean the other kind of realization is that there are a lot of defensive coaches that have come through in the last 20 years, right? So I mean, if we're talking about let's just talk about the Queen middle linebacker post race situation, right? I mean, one of the other things I think is a mark of a good organization too is exactly I think with what happened with Wink this year of the Ravens kind of realized again, this is me speculating here, but I would think that the Ravens sort of realized hey, Wink's scheme has done a lot of good things for us. 2019 was awesome. What Wink was able to do, especially masking the lack of depth in the middle linebacker room in 2019 and having a awesome defense leaning in on an amazing secondary was great. He did some really good things. But, as the years kind of went on, 2021, now, I don't want to say people have figured it out, but that year was not as successful due to other reasons, right? And I think, obviously it was mutual. I think everybody's kind of reported that, Wink also from his perspective wanted to show that he could reproduce this on another team and be successful because that would help him get his head coaching job, which he wants and, he should deserve. But, having the realization that, even though we kind of have a good thing, and again, the Ravens want to have this continuity. They don't want to have all of this turnover and, risk bringing in the wrong people into, situations that could derail some of this stuff. They realized that, okay, it was time to make a change. And, I think, we're all hoping for kind of McDonald, being this guy that can really help players like Queen get a lot more out of those type of players. Especially, I think, with McDonald, I think, he's worked with, Queen the whole time, basically. And so, I think them being willing to try and make changes, even though they may not be immediately fruitful, I think, they can be used tactically in certain situations to kind of force yourself to make a change in a different way and adopt to different things. So I do think that is, something that shouldn't be overlooked too.
Yeah. So in 25 years of the Ravens, not counting the upcoming year, they've had 7 coordinators, which is not bad, right? And of those coordinators, 4 of them left because they became head coaches. So Marvin Lewis left to be a Bengals head coach for a while. Nolan left for San Francisco, and Rex Ryan went to the Jets, and then Chuck Pagano went to the Colts. So it was just they were a factory with the only person, Greg Madison, very interesting guy. He literally was our defensive coordinator, and that was it. That's all he ever did, at least in the notes that I'm seeing here. So yep. I don't know where he went to.
He went to college? After. Yeah, he accepted a job as the defensive coordinator for University of Michigan, which I totally knew and am not just reading from Wikipedia right now, but
yeah. Well, I was looking into it. I was like, wow, he appeared, did well, and then just disappeared.
Yeah, I will say, Greg Madison. The defense was good those 2 years, but definitely the first guy. I think if you asked any Ravens fan to list all the defensive coordinators the Ravens had, Madison would be the last one, like
I forgot
19 out of 20 would name, you know.
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I remembered every single else one, but I was like, Madison, I don't go back and read about what happened there.
Yeah. I'm sure, I'm sure people like Ken, I think, would have a lot more opinions on this. I remember his schemes being a little, I guess, I don't know, a little different, but I guess definitely different styles from guys like Rex or Chuck Pagano. Even Dean Pease, but, plenty of people had issues with Dean Pease, but he was just here for so long that it wasn't, wasn't as weird, I guess, to kind of name him. But
during the Flacco years, 2008 and 2011 by far were the best defenses of that period. So
yeah, hands down. Yeah,
but you look at this list of coaches, like we're saying, 7 coaches before McDonald. 4 of them left to take on NFL head coaching jobs. Madison left to take on a position in college, and Pease retired.
Fake retired.
Yeah. As far as we know, he wasn't fired, although the Ravens may have said that they were going to fire him and then he retired. So that one maybe has an asterisk there. But Wink, Wink, I don't think we can say Wink was fired. That was a mutual agreement on the two parties, and his performance really didn't necessitate firing. It was just that, like we're saying, the personnel and the direction the Ravens want to go didn't quite fit what Wink wanted to do, and the Ravens gave him an ultimatum. Would you rather change your style a bit? I'm speculating a little bit here. We don't really know, but from everything we know, it sounds like the Ravens said, do you want to change some of what you're doing to fit what we're going with, or do you want an opportunity to go somewhere else and do your thing? And he chose the latter. Especially looking, if we compare with what the Ravens have done with offensive coordinator, and I think we'll end this episode discussing this a bit too, where there's plenty of firings, no continuity of a clean handle of the baton. It's really impressive what they've been able to do.
Yeah. It's, I think, thinking about it, there's a really fine line, especially on defense, I think, of like, kind of letting your coaches sort of like do what they want to do and saying that they have kind of free reign to do that versus, like it's like an alignment issue, right? It's like, if the head coach and the organization and, the coordinator are sort of in agreement of where their visions are for the defense, then I think that the coordinator should have more leeway to be able to do what they want to do, even if the results are not necessarily there. But, too often as fans, and I'm not infallible of this either, like it can be, when the results aren't there, it can be really easy to say like, oh, this guy sucks, like it's not going well. There can be many reasons for why, a team is not performing the way it is. Level of competition, teams are working for it, but they have, they need a lot of seasoning to be able to kind of overcome the stuff, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of reasons for why a team may not be, playing at the level that they could be. But, you like I said earlier, like you want people to be able to be in an environment where they can be challenged and grow and build towards something greater. But you also have to know, like, okay, we just don't have the guys, right? There's like a, when do you cut off that level of trust and just say like, okay, we got to make a change. And I think, it's for Ravens fans, like we're having this episode because it's a good thing that they've had such good continuity on the defensive side. But, I know like during the season, sometimes it could be awful and people are like, why is Harbaugh still holding on to this guy? Why are they still doing this? And that's like, if you want to have continuity and you want to have this culture of doing that, like you can't just be firing guys left and right. You can't just be letting guys go, because when you start to do that, you're not letting people be themselves. You're not building this, organization where people feel comfortable to be able to do things. And I think if you do that too much, I think that erodes the culture.
Yeah.
And you become the Cleveland Browns.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you have an anti-culture. I was actually going to bring this up earlier, Peter, of sometimes you have teams that have a bad culture, and it takes a lot of effort to be able to overcome that and change it around. And, even, again, like the Browns for like maybe the last like 3 years, like they looked like they were on the trajectory. And then after that, no, like they're right back to where they were, if not worse.
I do not envy Browns fans right now. Who knows if this gamble will actually pay off for them, but tangent, I guess. But yeah.
There's almost no way it does. Like, I really don't see how it happens.
Yeah.
I have a screenshot from our Discord, by the way. That's like,
oh, yeah?
Peter was like, well, maybe the Browns might turn it around. And I'm like, nah, it's the Browns. They'll never do it. So I have it for like
he has receipts.
5 years down or whatever.
See, I still have my receipt in Discord that Deshaun Watson's days of playing in the NFL are done. We'll see.
Yeah, you're on the right track. So, very interesting. I tell you, man, we are definitely lucky. We always feel like we're spoiled by being Ravens fans, and this defensive culture is definitely a big part of it, right? Like they say, defense wins championships, and I don't think they're too far from wrong. Like it's really powerful what a good defense can do. It can change the way you play offense, just like a good offense can change the way you play defense. But it's just really cool how they've been able to perform at such a high level for so long. And I think we're all optimistic that it will continue.
Definitely, yeah, and yeah, it's a great point you bring up. This league is all about offense right now, obviously, but defense still has a huge part in the game. Just look at the last 2 Super Bowls. Look at how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to use their defense to just neutralize the prolific offense of the Chiefs. And this past Super Bowl, the second half adjustments the Rams made to take advantage of the weak offensive line that the Bengals had, which allowed them to buy enough time to get that go-ahead score. And as much as the Ravens do need to find an offensive identity in the playoffs that they've lacked the past couple times they've been there, you throw out the Tennessee game, 3 of the past 4 playoff games the Ravens have been in, the defense dominated. The defense dominated against the Chargers in 2018, and then in 2020, just shut Derrick Henry down and neutralized the Bills' offense. So as much as fans rightfully point out, okay, yes, the Ravens did struggle offensively in the playoffs the past couple times. They've still got their playoff defense, even without these players that were part of the foundation of this culture. So, we got to look at the negatives to see what has to be fixed, but we can't overlook the positives that are still here. So while we're talking about the defense, we're talking about how, Ray Lewis and the players who played with him were the foundation for this culture that has been able to continue even after Ray has retired. The Ravens, they've really not had an identity on offense. I guess we could say running the football, maybe. But we've seen that hasn't led to, year in and year out success. Some years their offense is really good, other years not. But since Lamar Jackson has been here, we've definitely seen an uptick in this offense, a consistency in at least points scored per game that we really have not seen from the Ravens at all in their entire franchise history. Could Lamar Jackson be the start of the Ravens getting an offensive culture for once? We've only seen 4 years of it so far, 3.5, I guess you could say, since he missed the back half of 2021. But are we seeing the signs of the beginning of a Ravens offensive culture that will extend post Lamar Jackson's playing days?
I feel like for me, it's a little unclear. It could definitely happen, but I mean, like we said earlier too, right? Even though we kind of like to think that Ray was kind of like the change, that kind of sort of changed everything. It was just one person. It was the amalgamation of the right players, right coaches, and people having the right mindset. That like they knew that they had something special, and they like worked toward it, and they got there. Not just that they worked for it, but they got there. they kind of realize their full potential. I feel like Lamar has not realized his full potential yet, and it's not because of Lamar itself, right? It's the it's the whole group as an offense of, maybe we haven't had, we've had pieces here and there. Obviously 2019 was close. I think we had a good group of, like, Lamar was still young. Yanda, you had some of the old guys like Yanda who, sort of, trying to, instill that sort of excellence that he would bring to his play day in and day out. I feel like we just don't have the right mix of people on offense yet to kind of instill that culture. I think it's just sort of, it's pockets, and Lamar being the big one, Mark Andrews, we're hoping Bateman and some other guys, Ronnie Stanley coming back will also sort of be that. But I think I just haven't seen that sort of, like, continued excellence from, like, a core of players. I think we've just had a lot of turnover, or just, like, periods of mediocrity and things like that. Especially, and I think the other big things too is that people will point out, it's just, like, not a whole lot of playoff success. And again, that's not the blame of any one person, but it's just sort of like, we haven't hit that standard of excellence yet.
Chris, I agree with you. I think that I think they will not establish an offensive culture. And maybe it's a hot take. I don't really know if anyone has an offensive culture. Maybe the closest you could say is Green Bay with their gunslingers. I just don't know. I feel like offense is so heavily dictated by the personnel that you have. And not to say that defense isn't, but just the way that offenses kind of shift towards, like, the star players and their skills and such. I don't know. It's, like, really hard to say that. And also, you look at Lamar Jackson, who feels like a generational talent. Sure, there may be more rushing quarterbacks in the league, and by the time he's ready to hang up the cleats, there'll be their option for them to bring in someone like that. I don't know if that's a culture per se. Like, on defense, it's almost the intimidation factor. It's the we don't want to play those guys factor. Offenses seldom do that unless they're, like, maybe a really hard-nosed running team that just, like, bulldozes you. They're just, like, they have a swagger of scoring points. It's just a little different, right? Like, defense is, like, where true domination can be, other than maybe, like, offensive line play. Like, I feel like culture would be, like, offensive line play and running. It's really hard to find a culture of passing almost. And I think it's because of the intimidation. It's a moxie. It's like it's a next level, like, thing that isn't so much the playing. It's almost like the swagger, I guess.
It's also heavily dependent too on quarterback play, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you kind of said it with, like, Green Bay. I think that's actually a great example. That's, like, it's very close because they've been really fortunate to have a lot of really good quarterbacks. So yeah, they've had a little bit of that continuity. I mean, I'm sure that there were periods like the Ravens defense, right, where there were a few down years, right? But overall, like, at the macro level, there's pretty high consistency from that. But yeah, like if you're if you're another defense kind of lining up against an offense, and you're like, oh, we have to play the Ravens this week. I think you're right, Alec. Yeah, it's like if the defense is planning for all 11 players on offense, right, not just the quarterback, and so yeah, when you have it's you really think about offensive line play and blocking and running backs, and I feel like you think of that because that sort of that lasts beyond the quarterback, where quarterback, if you get an injury, you don't like the level of difference of play is, like, completely shifted. And unless you are really, really good at drafting quarterbacks, not just QB1s, but your backups that are really, really good, it's really hard to keep that level of excellence up.
Yeah, I think you guys bring up great points. It is really dependent on the quarterback when it comes to a passing identity. Packers are a great example that you guys brought up. I think the Colts are an even better example because you had the baton handoff between Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, and that passing offense didn't miss a beat. And then once Andrew Luck was forced to retirement because of injuries, then the Colts are no longer a passing team. I think.
No, I mean, now they've had 3 quarterbacks in 3 years, right?
Yeah. I mean, so we can say, the Ravens' offensive identity is, strong power running. That's been their moxie since the Jamal Lewis days. And, it's been very good rushing attack. I don't think it's had the same consistency as the defense. And then it's kind of hard to say if it's reached the height of the best years of the Ravens defense. Obviously, 2003 with Jamal's 2,000-yard season. But yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. It's a lot harder to define what an offensive culture is than a defensive. But we'll just have to see. We'll see what we're saying to this question in a decade from now.
Nice. Well, this episode was a lot of fun, guys. I really appreciate this one. I think we came up with a lot of good stuff here, and reminiscing about the culture that we have here, and hell, man, just being blessed every Sunday to be able to watch the Ravens and be able to kind of build up on all this stuff. It's a great source of pride, I think, for a lot of Baltimore Ravens fans out there. But that's about going to wrap us up for this episode. You guys can follow us if you're not already on Twitter at OneWinningPod. You can email us at onewinningpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'll be coming back probably next week, I think, with our next episode. Take a look out for that, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
We must protect this house. I will.
Hooah.
I know. That's what I always think about.